On my birthday, my husband brought the lover he hid for 20 years. I smiled and gave him a sealed letter on the night of my 45th birthday. My house was full of guests, candles flickering on an expensive cake, laughter filling every room, and a smile I had spent weeks preparing to wear. I'd planned this party for 2 months, sent invitations, hired caterers, decorated every corner to perfection. Everything was exactly as I'd envisioned, until my husband Richard walked through the door holding the hand of the woman he had secretly loved for 20 years. The room collapsed into complete silence. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every guest turned to stare, and I didn't blink. While they exchanged awkward glances, while whispers started spreading through my living room, I reached calmly into my pocket, pulled out a sealed letter I'd been carrying all evening, and placed it into Richard's trembling hand. Inside that letter was the truth I had carried alone for decades, a truth sharper than betrayal, older than his affair, and powerful enough to end everything or change everything. Richard came to my birthday party to reveal his secret, but that night, mine was bigger. Before I take you into that room, into that moment when my entire life exploded in front of 50 witnesses, you need to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. I share real, absolutely jaw-dropping stories like this every single week. Stories about betrayal, secrets that span decades, moments when everything changes in an instant. This birthday story is one of the most shocking I've ever lived through. So subscribe now, smash that like button because this story deserves to reach everyone, and drop a comment right now telling me about the worst birthday you've ever had, because mine just became legendary for all the wrong reasons. My name is Catherine. I'm 45 years old, and that birthday party 3 months ago was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone, the beginning of a new chapter in my life. Instead, it became the night when 20 years of secrets, his and mine, collided in front of everyone I knew. To understand what happened, I need to take you back. Need to explain how I got to that moment standing in my living room holding a sealed letter while my husband walked in with another woman. Richard and I had been married for 23 years. We met in our early 20s, married young at 22, built a life together that from the outside looked stable and successful. Richard was a corporate lawyer. I worked in marketing. We had 2 children who were now away at college, lived in a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood. We were the couple other people envied, the relationship that looked perfect from every angle. Except, it wasn't perfect. It hadn't been perfect for a very long time. About 5 years into our marriage, I started noticing changes in Richard. He became distant, distracted, working late more frequently. I suspected an affair but had no proof. And every time I asked, he'd deny it, get defensive, make me feel crazy for suggesting such a thing. So I stopped asking, stopped confronting, just accepted that our marriage had lost its passion and became one of those couples who stay together for the kids, for the lifestyle, for appearances. But I wasn't stupid. I knew something was happening. And about 10 years ago, I found proof. Found messages on Richard's phone to someone named Elena. Messages that made it clear this wasn't just a recent affair. References to all these years together, and 2 decades of loving you in secret. My husband had been having an affair for over 10 years at that point, maybe longer, and he'd hidden it so perfectly that I'd never suspected the depth of his deception. If you're already shocked, hit that like button right now and leave a comment saying, "Sealed letter," so I know you're with me. When I found those messages, I had a choice to make. Confront him, demand a divorce, blow up our lives and our children's stability, or stay quiet, gather information, and plan my response carefully. I chose the latter, because I knew that in a divorce, Richard had resources I didn't. He was a lawyer with connections and money. If I went into a divorce unprepared, I'd lose everything. So I stayed. I played the role of oblivious wife while I prepared, while I documented everything, while I built my own life separate from his. Over the next 10 years, I did several things Richard knew nothing about. I went back to school and got my MBA. I started my own consulting business that grew more successful than Richard realized. I quietly moved money into accounts he didn't know existed. I documented every suspicious trip, every late night, every lie. I built a case. I prepared for the day when I'd be ready to leave on my terms, not his. And most importantly, I discovered something about Elena that Richard didn't know I knew. Something that would change everything. Elena wasn't just Richard's mistress. She was the woman he'd been in love with since before he married me. They'd dated in college. She'd broken up with him, broken his heart, and then years later had come back into his life when we'd been married 5 years. And Richard, who'd never gotten over her, had started an affair that had lasted 20 years. 20 years of him loving her while living with me. 20 years of me being his second choice, his backup plan, the woman he'd married because Elena hadn't wanted him then. Subscribe to this channel right now because what I did with this information will shock you. But here's what Richard didn't know. Here's the secret I'd been carrying. When I discovered the depth of his affair 10 years ago, I didn't just document it. I contacted Elena. I found her contact information, and I reached out. And Elena and I, the wife and the mistress, we had a conversation that changed everything. Elena told me things Richard had never told me. She explained that she'd been trying to end the affair for years, that Richard was obsessed with her in ways that scared her, that she'd told him multiple times she didn't want to continue this way, but he wouldn't accept it, that she felt trapped between guilt about the affair and fear of how Richard would react if she truly ended it. And Elena told me something else, something that made every piece of this puzzle click into place. She told me that Richard had been secretly planning to leave me for years, that he talked constantly about divorcing me once our kids graduated college, that he was just waiting for the right time when it would cost him less and cause less social disruption, that I was essentially living on borrowed time in a marriage my husband was planning to exit the moment it became convenient. That information changed my entire strategy, because now I knew I wasn't just dealing with an affair. I was dealing with a man who'd been using me as a placeholder for over a decade while planning his exit, and that kind of betrayal deserved a response he'd never see coming. So Elena and I made a plan that would culminate on my 45th birthday, a plan that would expose Richard in the most public, most undeniable way possible. The plan was simple but devastating. On my birthday, I would throw a massive party, invite everyone, our friends, Richard's colleagues, my family, our neighbors, everyone who thought we had the perfect marriage, and Elena would arrive with Richard, would walk in holding his hand, would force him to publicly acknowledge the affair he'd been hiding for 20 years, would make it impossible for him to deny or minimize, would destroy his reputation and his carefully constructed image in one moment. But that wasn't the whole plan. The sealed letter was my piece. The letter contained documentation of everything I'd discovered over 10 years. Bank records showing Richard had been funneling marital assets to accounts I wasn't supposed to know about. Evidence of him hiding income from his law practice. Proof of him planning to file for divorce the moment our youngest graduated. And most damaging of all, a signed statement from Elena detailing the entire 20-year affair, Richard's obsessive behavior, and his plans to leave me. Everything documented. Everything prepared for the divorce I would now file on my terms, not his. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because what happened next was absolutely insane. The night of my birthday party, I was ready. I'd spent weeks preparing that smile, practiced looking happy and unsuspecting, made sure every detail of the party was perfect so no one would suspect anything was wrong. 50 guests filled my house. My children were there, home from college for my birthday. My parents, my siblings, Richard's partners from his law firm, our closest friends, everyone who mattered in our social circle, everyone who thought they knew us. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door open, heard the sudden silence that fell over the party, heard the gasps and whispers starting. I walked into the living room and there they were, Richard, looking simultaneously defiant and terrified, and Elena, holding his hand, her face pale but determined. They stood in my doorway in front of 50 witnesses, their affair finally visible to everyone. The room was completely silent, 50 people frozen, staring, unable to process what they were seeing. Richard's eyes found mine across the room, and I smiled, actually smiled. The smile I'd been preparing for weeks, the smile that said I wasn't surprised, wasn't devastated, wasn't the victim he expected me to be. I walked across the room calmly. Every eye in the house followed me. The only sound was my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I stopped directly in front of Richard and Elena, still smiling. "I'm so glad you could make it," I said. my voice perfectly steady. Both of you. Richard's face went white. He'd expected tears, expected me to collapse or scream or cause a scene. He hadn't expected calm, hadn't expected that smile. Catherine, he started, but I held up my hand. Don't, I said quietly. Don't try to explain. Don't apologize. Don't insult everyone here by pretending this is something it's not. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the sealed letter I'd been carrying all evening. The letter that contained everything. I placed it in Richard's trembling hand. This is for you, I said. I suggest you read it carefully, preferably with your lawyer present. Richard stared at the envelope, his hands shaking. What is this? Everything, I said simply. Everything I've known for 10 years. Everything I've documented. Everything you thought I didn't know about your affair with Elena. About your plans to leave me. About the marital assets you've been hiding. It's all there. Documented. Prepared for the divorce attorney I'll be meeting with on Monday. Leave a comment right now telling me if Richard deserved this public exposure or if I went too far. The room erupted. Whispers became voices. Shocked exclamations. My mother rushed over asking what was happening. Richard's law partner stared in disbelief. My children looked confused and horrified. And Richard just stood there holding that envelope like it was burning his hands. You knew? He finally managed to whisper. For 10 years? I knew, I confirmed. I knew about Elena. I knew about your plans to leave. I knew everything. And I spent 10 years preparing for this moment, building my own business, securing my own assets, documenting your deception, making sure that when this marriage ended, it would end on my terms, not yours. Elena spoke for the first time. Catherine, I'm so sorry. I tried to end it so many times. I know, I interrupted. We've talked, remember? You and I have been in contact for months. You helped me understand exactly who I was married to. You helped me see that I wasn't losing anything worth keeping. Richard's face went from white to red. You've been talking to Elena? Behind my back? The irony of him accusing me of deception after 20 years of affair made several guests gasp. You're really going to talk about things happening behind backs? I asked. After 20 years? After planning to divorce me the moment it became convenient? After hiding money and assets you legally owe me half of? I want you both to leave, I said firmly. This is my house. My name is on the deed, which you'll discover when you read that letter. I want you out. Now. You can send someone for your things tomorrow, Richard. But tonight you leave. Together. Since that's apparently what you've wanted for 20 years. Richard opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. You can leave voluntarily, or I can have you removed. Your choice. But you need to understand something. I'm done being your backup plan. I'm done being the woman you settled for because Elena didn't want you 20 years ago. I'm done with all of it. So leave. Take Elena. Build the life you've apparently been planning for decades. And I'll build mine without you. Richard and Elena left, walked out of my house, out of my party, while 50 guests watched in stunned silence. The door closed behind them and the room stayed quiet for several long seconds. Then my best friend Sarah started clapping, slowly at first, then louder, and other people joined in. And suddenly half my party was applauding while the other half looked completely shocked. My daughter hugged me, crying. My son asked if I was okay. My mother demanded to know why I hadn't told her. And I just stood there, finally able to let that prepared smile become a real one. Because it was over. 23 years of marriage to a man who'd been planning to leave me. And I'd ended it on my terms. Share this video right now with everyone who needs to see how to take control of their own narrative. The aftermath was complicated. Richard tried to fight the divorce initially, tried to claim I'd been deceptive by not confronting him earlier. But the evidence in that letter was devastating. Bank records showing he'd hidden assets. Elena's statement detailing his obsessive behavior and plans to leave. Testimony from his own colleagues who'd witnessed his behavior at the party. His reputation in the legal community was destroyed. His law partners asked him to leave the firm. Our mutual friends chose sides, and most chose mine. His relationship with our children became strained when they learned he'd been planning to leave their mother for years. The divorce was finalized 2 months ago. I got the house, half of Richard's retirement accounts, spousal support, and half of the assets he'd tried to hide. My business continued growing. My consulting firm is now more successful than his law practice ever was. I'm financially independent in ways I never was during our marriage. And I'm free. Actually free for the first time in 23 years. Richard and Elena did get together after the divorce, but their relationship didn't survive the transition from secret affair to public relationship. The fantasy they'd built over 20 years couldn't withstand reality. They broke up within 3 months. Richard is now alone, his reputation damaged, his relationship with his children strained, his career struggling, and I feel absolutely no sympathy because he chose this. He chose 20 years of deception. He chose to use me as a placeholder while planning his exit. He chose to bring his mistress to my birthday party thinking he'd finally reveal his secret and take control of the narrative. But my secret was bigger. My preparation was better. My response was more devastating than anything he'd planned. That sealed letter contained 20 years of consequences for 20 years of deception. And I handed it to him with a smile in front of everyone who'd thought we had the perfect marriage. If this story moved you, if it made you think about betrayal and justice and taking control of your own narrative, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. Would you have confronted him earlier? Would you have stayed quiet for 10 years? Would you have planned this kind of public exposure? Your engagement helps this story reach people who need to hear it. And here's what I want you to take away from this birthday story. You don't have to be the victim of someone else's narrative. When you discover betrayal, you have choices about how you respond. I chose to prepare, to document, to build my own security before confronting Richard's deception. And that preparation meant when the confrontation finally came, I had power, I had resources, I had evidence. I wasn't just reacting emotionally to his betrayal, I was executing a plan I'd spent years developing. Some people might say I should have confronted Richard earlier, that staying in a marriage I knew was a lie for 10 years was wrong. But those people don't understand strategic thinking. If I'd confronted Richard 10 years ago when I first found evidence of his affair, I would have been the weaker party in a divorce. I had less income, less savings, less proof of his deception. He could have minimized the affair, hidden assets more effectively, controlled the narrative. But by waiting, by preparing, by documenting everything over 10 years, I made sure that when our marriage ended, it ended with me in control. That sealed letter was my power. Everything documented, everything prepared, everything ready to present to divorce attorneys and judges and anyone who needed to see the truth. Richard thought he was so clever, planning his exit for when our kids graduated, hiding assets, maintaining his double life. But I was more clever. I knew about his plans, and I made my own plans. Plans he never suspected until I handed him that envelope in front of 50 witnesses. The night of my birthday, Richard came to reveal his secret, to finally acknowledge his 20-year affair, to take control of when and how our marriage ended. But I'd been controlling that narrative for 10 years. My secret, that I knew everything and had been preparing, was bigger than his. And I revealed it at the moment of maximum impact, in front of everyone, with documentation he couldn't deny, with a smile he never expected. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to this entire story. If you made it this far, drop a comment saying sealed letter, so I know you stayed to the end. Hit that like button one more time. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video with someone who's dealing with betrayal and needs to know they have power to control how their story ends. Because that's the real message here. You're not powerless. You're not just a victim waiting for someone else to decide your fate. You can prepare. You can plan. You can make sure that when the truth comes out, you're ready for it. My 45th birthday was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became the night when 20 years of secrets collided. Richard's secret affair with Elena, my secret knowledge of that affair, and my decade of preparation. And in that collision, I came out stronger. Not because I'm special or particularly clever, but because I refused to be a passive victim. I chose to act strategically instead of emotionally. I chose preparation over immediate confrontation. And that choice meant when Richard finally made his move, I was ready with a counter move he never saw coming. The sealed letter was symbolic. It represented everything I'd been quietly doing while Richard thought I was oblivious. Every bank record copied, every suspicious email documented, every late-night phone call logged, every piece of evidence carefully preserved. 10 years of preparation condensed into one envelope, and the look on Richard's face when I handed it to him, when he realized I'd known all along, was worth every moment of those 10 years. People ask if I regret staying in the marriage for 10 years after discovering the affair. And honestly, no. Because those 10 years gave me time to prepare, time to build my own career and financial independence, time to make sure my children were emotionally mature enough to handle their parents' divorce, time to document Richard's deception so thoroughly that he couldn't minimize or deny it. If I'd left immediately, I would have been weaker, less prepared, more vulnerable, and Richard would have controlled the narrative. Instead, I controlled it. I chose when to reveal what I knew. I chose how to end our marriage. I chose to do it publicly, in front of witnesses, in a way that made Richard's deception undeniable. And I chose to prepare so thoroughly that when our divorce went to court, I had every advantage. That's not victim behavior. That's strategic power. And it's available to anyone willing to think long-term instead of just reacting emotionally. So if you're in a situation where you've discovered betrayal, here's my advice. Document everything. Build your own financial security. Make sure you have resources and options before you confront. Get legal advice from attorneys your partner doesn't know about. Plan your exit strategy. And only when you're ready, when you're prepared, when you have power, that's when you reveal what you know. Not before, because preparation is power, and power determines who controls the narrative when everything falls apart. Richard thought he had power because he'd been deceiving me for 20 years, but I had more power because I knew about his deception and prepared for 10 years. And when we finally faced each other, when he walked into my birthday party with Elena thinking he was finally taking control, I handed him a sealed letter that proved I'd been in control all along. His secret was big. But mine was bigger, and that's why I won. The end.